Shall we start? Where we left off last time was with the brain drain and with a quote from the Ayatollah that was very much not sad about the loss of those brains and the hope that they would simply be replaced by more appropriate brains. While the Ayatollah didn't take it seriously, apparently, it was a serious issue to several other countries. Ethiopia, for example, lost 75% of its skilled workforce between 1980, 81, and 1990. Iran, as I pointed out, today is considered the biggest country who's suffering most from the brain drain, the massive and rapid immigration of people with skills, and often people who have been educated at considerable public expense. This graph shows the effect, or at least or a measure at least, of the brain drain on countries from the Caribbean region. And I think if you notice here that there's in a sense selectivity is what this really shows. That this is the percent of the labor force that has migrated, right, and disaggregated by primary, secondary, or tertiary schooling, that is schooling beyond the level of high school. As you can see, that people with primary education from at least in these Caribbean regions between 65 and 2000 did not migrate with, well, I mean, some of them did migrate with fairly high rates, 32% from St. Kitts and Nevis. But for the most part, these numbers are much lower than secondary educated workforce and considerably lower than the tertiary workforce. And if you check out those numbers, those are really quite surprising. Some of these countries have lost above more than 80% of their tertiary educated people. So those countries educate people, they send them to college, and then as soon as they graduate, 8 in 10 of them leave the country. From the opposite point of view, the skill level of migrants has actually been rising in the United States. This graph is a little hard to see, but what it shows is that between 1990 and 2000, the percentage of immigrants from low-income countries who are skilled has risen, and for the U.S. it's risen by only over 10%. It's gone from something like 20%, something like 30% over that decade. And similar effects, similar effects, and about the same for the OECD as a whole. Similar effects for Canada and Australia in the EU15. What's interesting is that during this period, Australia and Canada in particular have adopted point systems. They've adopted immigration systems that absolutely encourage this. There's a point system. In order to immigrate, you have to score a certain number of points on a chart, and you get points for being young and smart and rich. And so the U.S. doesn't have so explicit policies that, but nonetheless, this is whatever policy the U.S. has, and we're going to learn soon what policy actually is now. It's like the Hart-Sellers Act, but it has been changed a little bit. It certainly does seem to encourage skilled migrants. Now, some of this is also due to just increasing skill levels in the countries that are sending immigrants. But nonetheless, simply saying there is a selective effect, and it is this brain drain, and it's certainly not seen as particularly beneficial to the countries who are sending these skilled immigrants. The other aspect of the Hart-Celler Act that I wanted to talk about before we move on to the next and third phase of the Cold War is the effect of Hart-Celler on Mexican immigration. Recall that this is the first act. For the first time, the Western Hemisphere immigration is now treated like the rest of the world's immigration. Recall that before this, all immigration acts had specifically excluded Western Hemisphere immigrants from any kind of numerical limits. The Hart-Celler Act imposes a limit of 120,000 on the entire Western Hemisphere, and until 1976, until the law was amended in 1976, there are no country-specific limits. For the non-Western Hemisphere, there is a country-specific limit. That is, the old world has a ceiling of 170,000 instead of 120,000, and there's a 20,000 limit per country. But the Western Hemisphere is treated a little differently. It's got to 120,000 total, and it's not country-specific. That's a big advantage to Mexico, because Mexican migration was running at greater than 20,000 in 1965, about 35,000. So that would have had an effect, and as we'll see, in 1976, it does indeed have an effect. Okay. It's also true that the Bracero program ended in 1961, so that's also important in this calculation. Because what happens after Hart-Celler is that the number of undocumented Mexican immigrants rises. Border apprehensions rise in 1965. They're about 90,000, and by 1976, when the 20,000 cap is imposed in Mexico, they're already up to 781,000. But of equal importance as the numerical increases in apprehensions. These are not all Mexicans, by the way, but there's never more than 100,000 non-Mexicans in those numbers. But equally important is that the status of undocumented or illegal takes a harder edge after Hart-Celler and after the end of the Bracero program. And what's happened is that before 1965 or before 1961, a person of Mexican origin who's in the United States may be legal or illegal, but it represents just an act. It represents something that they chose to do. They could be legal because there are no specific quota limits. So for wealthy Mexicans, it's simply a matter of paying $8 and coming across. For poor Mexican workers, it's a matter of being rounded up by the INS and brought to the border and dried out, as in Operation Wetback, and brought back as a bracero, for example. But with the demise of the bracero program, and with increasing limitations, such as particularly after 1976, when there's a 20,000 limit, now to be an undocumented immigrant it's no longer a reflection of something you did. It's a reflection, or at least comes to be seen as a reflection of who you are, characteristic of the person. Because after 1976, the 20,000 first person can't migrate legally. It's no longer simply, well, the $8 tax on the fumigation was unpleasant, so I decided to walk across the border otherwise. But the number of us here would be the same if I were legal. You just see what I'm saying. Over time, it takes on a harder edge. And this is a result of putting Mexican migration under this, not quota system, but under this new preference system with these new numerical limits that are imposed by the Hart-Celler Act. Now, an ironic consequence of this is that in making it harder, more costly to migrate, more difficult to migrate, an undocumented person may choose to stay longer. If I don't have evidence for this after the Hart-Celler Act, but this has clearly been demonstrated afterwards in more recent times with increased, every time that there are increases in stringency at the border, every time there's a new Operation Gatekeeper or something, it's found that undocumented workers stay longer. Stay longer because coming across the border becomes costly. So, in a sense, the problem becomes, less tractable, let's say. So two things. The problem becomes less tractable, and also they're more undocumented migrants. I think that you're reading Suro, that comes as no surprise. The immigration regime now, with a few exceptions that were made in 1976, 78, and 1990, is really the same as we described in the Hart-Celler Act. I'm going to talk a little more about the 1990 Act later, but the modifications have been fairly minor. They've been minor, at least in the framework of the thing. We still have a system of numerical caps that are not entirely meaningful because large numbers of people are exempt from the cap. We don't have nationality quotas anymore, which is the key difference. So in 1976, the Western Hemisphere became subject to preference system and per country cap. All these modifications tend to reduce the differences between the treatment of the Western Hemisphere and the rest of the world. That's really how these things go. In 1978, see, the old and new world quotas are combined. So instead of having a separate one for new and old, just one big cap on the number of immigrants and a preference system underneath. And then in 1990, the cap is raised to 675,000. But that's a very theoretical number because it's very flexible. It's a very flexible cap. And I want to save the story of how it works until we get there. But the gist of this is that while the Hart-Celler Act has been modified in some ways in reaction to its imperfections and its effects which were not anticipated, but largely it's still intact. We still are in this post. It's still useful for us to think of ourselves in the post-65 immigration era. Okay. Are there any questions about Hart-Celler, about the second phase of the Cold War? Okay, then let's move on to the last phase, if we may. Okay, so we turn now to refugees, asylees, undocumented immigrants in the last phase of the Cold War. Recall, for purposes of this class, we divided the Cold War into an early hysterical period, characterized by McCarthy and so forth, a middle period that was all about the civil rights era, and which spawned the Hart-Celler Act, which we just talked about, and then this final period, which is really kind of leftovers. It's a less coherent period than the others. This is a time of Reagan and Carter, of arms control, détente. The Cold War is definitely in remission for most of this period, yet there is a flare-up in Latin America, in Central America in particular, which has a lot of effects for us on immigration. The key problems that I want to talk about, the key issues that come to the fore in this period, are refugees. Recall that the Hart-Celler Act does include a small category for refugees, but very quickly that proves to be ineffective. And in 1980, there's an act all about refugees, and refugees are removed from the Hart-Celler system and treated separately, and we'll see how that works. And then the second issue is illegal immigration. This is, as we just said, the Hart-Celler Act encouraged, I shouldn't say encouraged, but conditions around the Hart-Celler Act led to increases in undocumented immigration and in greater significance of that status. So by 1986, the problem is once again serious enough to prompt Congress to act and pass the Immigration Reform and Control Act, also known as the Simpson-Rodino Act, in 1986. And then finally, we have liberalization again in the 90s, a sort of surprising liberalization after considering what happened with the 1986 Act, and the backlash that follows. That will take us, I think, to as close as a history class should come to the present. So the main points are that the Cold War is going to shift from Europe towards the Third World, and refugees then become more diverse, and policy strains that follow it. Refugee policy, if you think about it for a second, is always going to be difficult. It's going to be more difficult than an orderly sort of immigration policy for people who can plan their trip. Refugees don't usually plan to become refugees, and so it's hard to know what their numbers are. It's hard to regulate the flow numerically. That makes it tough. The Immigration Reform Control Act, 1986, is the failed attempt to reform immigration in the 1980s. It's not really an attempt to reform immigration. It's an attempt to deal with illegal or undocumented immigration. I should apologize for the misleading, but fail is right. The story of how this act fails is one we will get to hopefully today. And then we'll talk about some further liberalization in the 90s and the gridlock and the backlash that follows from that. Okay, so to review, or the outline, then I'm going to take another minute to remind ourselves about the post-Hart-Celler's world, and then we'll turn to refugees and asylees and why they are indeed the vexing issue of the 70s and 80s. Then immigration, that's the Immigration Reform Act. It should be the Refugee Act of 1980. Sorry about that. I'll fix that before you download it. Cubans and Haitians are a special interesting case, and one that has a direct bearing on how the 1980 Act plays out. We'll talk a little about Central Americans, and then the 86 Immigration Reform and Control Act, which is Simpson-Mazzoli, not Simpson-Rodino. Sorry about that. Okay, so we just talked about the Hart-Celler Act, but it's useful, I think, to summarize what's happened since. Recall that when Johnson signed it, he said, words to the effect that this really isn't a big deal. It's not going to change your daily life. This is just a little thing we're doing here in the Great Society. But he was wrong. The numbers of immigrants are shown here, about 3 million in the 60s, 4.5 in the 70s, 7 in the 80s, 9 in the 90s, and 11 million in the first 8 years of the first decade of the 21st century. And at the same time, not surprisingly, the proportion of the population that's foreign-born is rising. And it's now rising towards levels that are as high as it's ever been, back at the beginning of the 20th century. That was certainly unsuspected. The mood in 1965, the intention of the 1965 Act was certainly not to restore or to bring about an era of renewed mass immigration. The point of the Hart-Celler Act was to simply remove the vestiges of racism from the legislation, from the immigration system at the time. It did have that effect, and as a result, where 42% were from Asia and Latin America in 1960 and 64, by 1975, that's 75%. So it did have the effect of increasing diversity. So, although that was not its intended consequence, I would say. The intended consequence was to be neutral, not, however, to preserve, as the 1924 Act was. It was not intended to preserve the ethnic makeup. So this isn't, I would say this is not a failure of the intention of the Act, but it's nonetheless something that probably would have surprised many of the people who voted for it. This, however, is the big surprise. The numbers, simply that as a result of the Hart-Celler Act, immigration is a big part of the American story again. Now turning to refugees, remember that the Hart-Celler Act did include a small refugee category. It was supposed to be 6%, a 6% preference within the total of 290 slots. 10,200 from the Eastern Hemisphere and 7,200 from the Western Hemisphere. This is a nice idea, but it did not work out well. And I think even probably from the perspective of 1965, you could have seen that it would. This jagged line shows the number of refugees and asylees that are admitted in various years. And remember, this is the story of the Cold War. Every time there is a Cold War event, an uprising, a failed uprising, or a war that doesn't come out well, there's a big spike in the number of refugees. And even looking back in 1965, you could see that it was going to be tough to propose a number and make that work for refugees. They proposed a number that was fairly smaller, but in 1965, perhaps you could forgive them for being so myopic that because 1964 and 1965 were themselves low years, and refugees, maybe they thought that pattern was over. Looking back, I don't know. They definitely guessed wrong about. They definitely guessed wrong about the number, and it became, by 1980 at least, it became clear that that something else needed to be done. After 65, well, let me step back again. While Johnson was signing, actually, while he was signing the Hart-Celler Act, he announced a massive parole for Cubans. Right? This was entirely outside of this legislation. So you can get a sense that Lyndon Johnson probably didn't think it made any sense either. But so there he was, he's signing it right there in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, and he's telling us that there's going to be we're going to have a parole, just the same way that presidents have had parole before. All of these previous bumps have been paroles, right? This is the process where the president says, the president admits people and then asks Congress to regularize them. Well, Johnson does that while he's signing this law that says there are only going to be, what is it, 7,000 Western Hemisphere refugees from now on. This is part of the Flight to Freedom program. It was an airlift that took place between 1965 and 1971, and it brought 297,000 Cuban immigrants to Miami. It was funded by the United States, but it required Cuban cooperation. By 1971, it was criticized as being unfair because it allowed Cubans to use up all of the preference slots, but they were clearly using up all of them and more. In 1968, moving forward, Nixon granted 60,000 Czechs asylum, again using the parole authority from the McCarran-Walter Act. This is what happened. This was a classic Cold War move. In January of 1968, Alexander Dubček loosened many of the restrictions on Czechs, and that resulted in what was known as the Prague Spring, which was followed by the Soviet winter, or Soviet summer, when Soviet tanks rolled into Prague to put down. So the reaction in the U.S. was naturally to take all the propaganda points it could by admitting 60,000 Czechs, and so it was back to normal. It was simply business as usual again in the post-Hart-Celler era as far as refugees were concerned. In 1974, it was the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. That came from that was a reaction to a Soviet repression of Jews. Jews in the USSR were seen as overrepresented among educated elites, and there was an anti-Semitic backlash resulting in laws limiting Jewish access to certain professions. Oddly, at the same time, Jews were permitted to emigrate to Israel, interestingly. That had to do with the USSR's nationalities policy, but they controlled that outflow by harassment. After Nixon, as part of the SALT and trade talks, the strategic arms limitation talks and trade talks, managed to negotiate an agreement where Russian Jews could immigrate directly to the United States. The USSR backtracked on that, later demanding, perhaps not surprisingly, reimbursement for the expenses incurred of educating those people. Right? So the Soviet Union recognized this concept of brain drain. In any case, Jackson-Vanik responded to that. Congress responded to that with the Jackson-Vanik Amendment that said no free trade, no most favored nation status, essentially no free trade agreements with countries unless immigration was free. Okay? It was all, of course, for communist countries. Then, after the Vietnam War ended, Ford rescued 130 Vietnamese, Cambodians, and Laotians. In this first wave, these were mainly people who were very strongly associated with the U.S. war effort there. They were people in the helicopters lifting off of the embassy in that famous picture. By 1980, there had been 10 separate programs for Indo-Chinese refugees. So you get the idea that this pattern just continues. There are more and more refugees. There were, however, some that were not welcomed. For example, Chileans fleeing dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet between 1973 and 1990. South Koreans between 53 and 81, when that country was similarly under dictatorship. The Marcos years during the Filipinos, Haitians always, and Salvadorans and Guatemalans during their civil war periods. And why might it be that while Czechoslovakia, Cambodians, Laotians, Indo-Chinese, and Cubans are welcomed, Chileans, Haitians, Filipinos, Salvadorans, and Guatemalans were not? Yes? Yes. Exactly right. These were not communist countries. These were our friends in the Cold War. They were, in fact, staunchly anti-communist in all of these cases, and this was the Cold War logic. Even though these people had a well-founded fear of persecution, remember the Hart-Celler's definition of a refugee still has the word communist in it. So it's very hard to support a government and at the same time accept large numbers of refugees from it. Right? So as a consequence, if you were escaping communism at this time,